According to one expert, the Jets may have gotten 2 late-round steals in the 2025 NFL Draft in Francisco Mauigoa and Tyler Barron. Locked On Jets starts now.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Monday, July 21st, 2025, and I'm your host, John B. from GanggreenNation.com. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day, and a big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. On today's show, we are talking Jets rookies. Mason Taylor has signed his rookie contract. That means the entire Jets rookie class is signed on time for training camp. It's cause for celebration. Probably bigger cause for celebration than a lot of people realize. I'll explain why. But before we get to that, we have a guest, Alex Donno, the host of Locked On Canes here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Alex covers the Miami Hurricanes. And I felt like he'd be a good guest because the Jets drafted a pair of Miami Hurricanes in the late rounds of this year's NFL draft. Francisco Mauigoa, a linebacker, and Tyler Barron, a defensive end. Alex is going to give us insight in what the Jets may expect in these 2 late-round picks. And he thinks the Jets may have found a couple of steals. Let's jump into my conversation with Alex Donno of Locked On Canes. Joining us today, we have a special guest, Alex Donno, who is one of my colleagues at the Locked On Podcast Network. He's host of Locked On Canes, our show on the Miami Hurricanes. And Alex is a great guest because if you follow the Jets this spring, you know that on day 3 of the 2025 NFL Draft, they picked 2 players from Miami. So Alex is going to give us some information on Francisco Mauigoa and Tyler Barron. Alex, thank you so much for joining me today.
It's my pleasure, and I'm so happy to talk about these guys, especially, for Tyler Barron, Miami had him for 1 year. They both transferred from other programs, but for Tyler Barron, Miami had him just for 1 season. For Mauigoa, we call him Kiko. His name is Francisco, but he goes by Kiko. He was at Miami for 2 years, John, but it felt like longer. Like he really became such an important, leader on that team that it's hard to believe he was only 2 seasons at Miami.
Well, why don't we begin by talking about Mauigoa? The Jets drafted him in the 5th round, pick 162 overall. I guess we can begin with just a general overview of his time at Miami.
Well, his first year, I mentioned he was at Miami for 2 seasons, 2023 and 2024. He transferred over from Washington State. The first season was just much more statistically productive, and for a certain reason, I felt kind of bad for Kiko because he could have, after his junior season 2023, could have gone to the NFL. I think he thought about it, but he ultimately made the decision to play 1 more year to really raise his NFL draft stock. And I don't think that worked out for him. And I also don't really think it was entirely his fault, John. I mean, his first season at Miami, Kiko, I thought, and not just me, I think he was the consensus best overall player on Miami's defense in the 2023 season. Was co-leader on the team in sacks at 7.5. It felt like he was all over the field, everywhere at once. He was just exactly the kind of linebacker you want to have. And then you fast forward to 2024, where he was good in his second season at Miami, but was playing through some injuries. He had an off season between 23 and 2024. He had a procedure done on one of his shoulders that I think did affect him in his final year. But then overall, for anyone who paid attention to college football last season, Miami's defense was really, really, really bad. And there was not anything, Francisco Mauigoa could have done himself to make that unit more productive. And, and also I felt that really the biggest Achilles heel on Miami's defense, which he had to cover a lot for, was Miami's safety room, which just took a huge hit. In 2023, Miami had an All-American in Cam Kinchins and a borderline All-American in James Williams, who's already doing really good things with the Tennessee Titans his first couple of years. The safety room took a massive hit from 2023 to 2024. And so Mauigoa was in a lot of situations where he had to drop into coverage, and I think he was exposed a lot by, the players playing behind him, the safeties just really not communicating and not having any idea where they were supposed to be. So I think it affected him. So, there were times, and obviously you say this about a lot of linebackers, like Kiko is not that great in coverage, but he was put in a lot of situations he shouldn't have been in the 2024 season. I also think Miami's defensive scheme didn't do him a whole lot of favors. There's a reason why, Miami fired their defensive coordinator from last season, Lance Guidry, and moved on, replaced him with Corey Heatherman from Minnesota. So, I ultimately, John, I think the Jets got actually really good value getting Mauigoa in the 5th round, because based on the 2023 season that he had and his decision to gamble on himself and to play his final year at the U, I thought he would maybe raise his stock to, the earlier part of day 2 is where I thought he would end up, but it didn't play out that way for him. And so ultimately, I think the New York Jets got great value on a player that probably could have been drafted higher in a different situation.
That's great information. I used to have this scout on the show. His name was Dave T. Thomas. Unfortunately, he passed away a few years ago, but he was an outstanding talent evaluator. In fact, he became like a consultant for like half the teams in the NFL. He'd send me these scouting reports, and a lot of context is lost when you like try and evaluate these players. And he would have information on like a guy that his stats were down, but he was trying to play hurt, or something like he was covering for a deficiency in the system. And like sometimes I think that's where you find some of the steals. So I think you kind of answered. I was kind of interested if there's certain players I feel like when you're covering a college team, you say, you know what, an NFL team's going to get a steal when they draft that guy in the third day. And so you kind of think Mauigoa could be one of those guys for the Jets.
Absolutely, because there's other stuff, and listen, he's a really good pass rushing linebacker, very disruptive, really good hitter. He's also got a nose for the football, has made a habit of grabbing interceptions both at Washington State and Miami. So there's a lot to work there on the field. But then I think where kind of that extra added value comes in, and of course the Jets front office, they did their due diligence on this stuff when you decide to draft any player. He's a really strong character guy. Mauigoa for the past 2 seasons has been a part of the Miami Hurricanes Leadership Council. Like he's been one of those, example setters for young teammates. And so there's a lot of good character, really strong Pacific Island family, very close-knit group. In fact, one of the reasons why I think Kiko decided to stay the second year at Miami was he wanted to play another year with his younger brother, who is maybe a year from now, you're watching out for the other Mauigoa, Francis, who is potentially going to be a first-round draft pick at right tackle. He's really sensational. So he wanted to play, I think, with his brother for a second year. The family is really close. So you'll probably see some of the Mauigoa relatives around the facility as well.
Yeah, and I'm not surprised the Jets would draft somebody like this because, I mean, Alex, if you watch the NFL over the last couple of years, you know that the Jets have brought in a lot of big-name guys, and it's been a collection of players. It hasn't been a team. And Jets have a new head coach, Aaron Glenn, who's talked about how they're trying to build a stronger culture around there. So I get the feeling, Kiko sounds like the kind of guy you want when you're trying to turn your culture around.
Yeah, he's really good with that. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if, maybe not necessarily as a rookie, but a couple years in, if he becomes one of the leaders of the team, because he's that sort of personality.
Now, one of the things like I thought when I watched him on the film, and our everydayers are probably sick of me hearing my opinion. So we can get somebody else's opinion on this. But I was really struck by like how he was always around the football. I know he was a really strong run defender. He was just a guy who, and sometimes like you see that especially at the linebacker position, it's not always like the biggest guy, the strongest guy, the fastest guy who is an effective linebacker in the NFL. It's just the guy who takes the right routes to the ball and has instincts and knows where to get the ball. And he struck me as one of those guys.
Yeah, you're dead on with that. Like he's a live wire, and it was the sort of player, like he kind of emerged as an option for Miami at the perfect time. And again, he was, for all the reasons I talked about, a bigger factor in 2023 than he was in 2024. But he was really a godsend because the Hurricanes had been lacking that type of linebacker. They hadn't had a guy like that in probably 4 or 5 years conservatively. And he's always going to be around the football. The instincts I think that's something you can't teach. Now, I'm sure that there's work that goes into that. He's very diligent with his film study. Like, you're never going to have to worry about him getting distracted off the field or partying when he should be, studying film. Like, he's always going to be very diligent with that stuff. And I think it translates to him like you said, having good instincts and always being near the football.
Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by FanDuel. Summer sports are in full swing, and whether you're all about baseball under the lights, golf on the green, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. You're already following the action. Why not make it a little more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get in on the game while your friends are getting sunburned at the beach. Baseball is heating up. We are now past the All-Star break. Yankees and Mets chasing playoff spots. We got golf. So much happening in the sports world. And of course, you can look forward to the NFL season. If you think the Jets are going to beat their 5.5 win over under on FanDuel, it's the place to get in on the action. Are you new to FanDuel? New customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com to get started. Again, open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com to get started. This is an ad by BetterHelp. Workplace stress is at an all-time high. 61% of the global workforce is reporting higher than normal stress levels. This summer is the perfect time to take small steps to focus on your wellness and manage the challenges that come with your workday. Of course, most of us cannot just quit our jobs or take endless vacations, but we can start small, whether it's getting outside for a few minutes, adding movement to your day, or talking to someone who can help you navigate life's challenges. And that's where BetterHelp comes in. Do you have boundaries that you've been wanting to set? Therapy can help you set healthier boundaries at work so stress does not spill over into the rest of your life. As the largest online therapy provider in the world, BetterHelp can provide access to mental health professionals with a diverse variety of experience. Unwind from work with BetterHelp. Our listeners get 10% off their first month at betterhelp.com/lockedon. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Let me ask this. Did Miami blitz its linebackers frequently? The reason I ask that is the Jets are moving to a defense where we're expecting the off-ball linebackers to get after the quarterback with some frequency. So I'm interested in Kiko's ability as a blitzer.
Yes, actually, as a blitzer, that is one of his strengths. That's something Miami has done. They did a lot with their previous defensive coordinator. Maybe not that it matters with Kiko. They maybe will go a little bit away from that this coming season with what I understand about their new DC. But there were a lot of blitzes, and Kiko was usually the guy. It was either him or Wesley Besaint, who was playing Will linebacker, Kiko primarily playing Mike linebacker. But he had plenty of opportunities to get in the backfield, and he made a meal of it.
And he also strikes me as, I'm not sure how much special teams he played in Miami, but he strikes me as the guy just because of those instincts that he could probably seamlessly fit into like special teams coverage units as a rookie.
Yeah, like based on, kind of his status, it wasn't something he did a whole lot of at Miami the last couple of years, but I think he's going to be that type of rookie second-year guy when he's, trying to find more opportunities. I think that those could come for him on special teams because he's got all the tools. I mean, you look at he's not a slow lumbering guy. Like he's got some speed. He's got his instincts to get to the ball. So and he's willing to get his hands dirty. So if his best opportunities as a rookie are going to come on special teams, I think he'd be more than willing to relish in those chances.
All right, I'm going to say something that I'll probably be upset with myself for saying this later on because it's such a cliche, but he sounds like they're really like just like a lunch pail kind of guy. And that's, like I said, Aaron Glenn's trying to change the culture. Is a 5th round linebacker going to take on a leadership role year one? Probably not, but they're looking for guys who are going to come in and work hard and guys who are going to buy into the program and guys who are going to like really do what it takes to improve. And it sounds like he's that kind of guy.
Yeah, he absolutely is. And it's also, there's some in that approach, there's definitely some similarities with what the University of Miami has been trying to do, because there was definitely, going back 4 or 5 years, there were a lot of culture problems. And so that's why, you have to go after guys like Kiko. Of course, Cam Ward was the ultimate leadership guy for the 1 year that he spent at Miami. I think you really need guys like that because they're the glue for the roster. I mean, I know your audience is not big, but I'm also a Miami Dolphin fan down here. But I think the culture's been pretty rotten. So maybe your listeners will be happy, or everydayers are happy that I said that. There's been a lot of issues with the Dolphins culture with some of these divas like the Tyreek Hills that are dictating things. So I think you need more of these lunch pail guys.
Well, I am really flattered that you're a Dolphins fan and you're coming on the Jets show. I was going to thank you anyway, but wow, thank you. Now I really feel.
Yeah, like I wore the T-shirt. I'd like to say it's to troll you, but I have had this T-shirt on all day, and I didn't say like I'm going on Locked On Jets, but I don't feel like changing my shirt, so here I am.
No, we actually have a really good relationship in the AFC East with all of our Locked On shows. Like we'll do like preseason like previews, and like I'll do it with Joe Marino of Locked On Bills, Kyle Krabs of Locked On Dolphins, like all of my AFC East colleagues, and like all of our bosses are like, "Wow, you guys are so nice to each other." It's like in the other division, people are like, "Wow, people are really going at each other. You guys are so polite." So
I mean, it's easy. Like I don't know Marino as much, but I know Kyle Krabs a little bit. He's such a nice guy. You seem like such a nice guy, so it's not that surprising that you have a harmonious relationship.
All right, we're here with Alex Donno, the host of Locked On Canes here on the Locked On Podcast Network. He's kind enough to join us despite being a Dolphins fan today because the Jets drafted 2 players from the Miami Hurricanes in the 2025 NFL Draft. We spent the segment talking about Francisco Mauigoa. Now let's talk about Tyler Barron. The Jets picked him, pick 176 overall. Alex, as you mentioned earlier, Barron only spent 1 year in Miami, so maybe not as big a part of the program as Kiko Mauigoa, but what can you tell us about his career down south?
He has all of the physical tools, John, and it's the reason why he was drafted in the first place at 6'4", about 260 pounds, all runway type of guy. And I also might add something that impressed me about Barron. I didn't get a chance to get to know him as much as Kiko was in Miami for 2 years, but I do remember interviewing Barron at Media Day about a year ago at this time, and a couple times throughout the season. He's another one who is really, really mature. And, I guess he was about 22, 23 years old when he was at Miami. You would think this guy's 27, 28, very focused on football. So I think he's another really good character guy, really good locker room guy. Spent most of his career with the Tennessee Volunteers before transferring over to Miami. Now, when it comes to the on the field stuff, Barron was leader or co-leader in Miami with 5.5 sacks this past season, which is not a huge number. The sacks were down across the board. I talked about the issues, Miami's defense not being up to snuff compared to what it was the year prior. But Barron was someone who I will say that the one thing, and again, context matters, like we talked about with Kiko. So I don't necessarily know how much of this was on him. One of the issues with Miami's defensive line last year that was frustrating was way too many twists and stunts, which I thought was kind of to the detriment of their overall pass rush. But when Tyler Barron was on, and there were a handful of games, including the game against Florida, which was an old rival of his in the SEC, and then again at Miami, where there were times when he looked unblockable. It did feel like there were certain times when it was feast or famine. Like Tyler Barron would have a 1.5 sack type of game, a 2-sack type of game. Then for the next 3 games, wouldn't record a sack, maybe a half TFL, something like that. So it was a little bit of a feast or famine type of situation with him. But honestly, I think consistency or lack thereof is probably the only reason why he wasn't maybe a day 2 type of pick. So if he can kind of tap into that consistency, and again, scheme may play into that a little bit with him, but he's got all the physical tools. Miami knew this when they picked him up from Tennessee in the transfer portal. It was a big time get for them. It was just, more about finding that, hey, instead of giving us 2 sacks this week and, a month before you get another sack, maybe give us a sack per game. It just wasn't all that consistent for Barron last year.
How was Barron as a run defender?
That is another area where he's got that versatility. And I think I would grade him out pretty highly as a run defender. I think of him more as a pass rushing specialist, but I can remember looking at the Pro Football Focus numbers at the end of the year and being pleasantly surprised. And I think versatility was something he picked up a lot of. That was something he liked about Miami's defense was, sometimes it's a stand-up rusher, hand in the dirt, other times had opportunities to play the run. So I think that's an area where he can develop into a pretty solid run defender.
Now, going back to his pass rushing a little bit, do you think that this is a guy who has this refinement in his skill set to potentially contribute in year 1?
I think he can. If you talk about the situations, because again, you bring him on for a 3rd and long, pin his ears back, that's his wheelhouse, right? In fact, I don't think Miami produced enough 3rd and longs this past year to really give him those opportunities. So I think he could be someone who, because he's already physically mature. Like, this is not someone you bring into the NFL. You're like, oh, he's got to add a little size. He's had an NFL body for the past couple of years. So physically, Tyler Barron is already there. So, yeah, I think he can give you something year one.
Yeah, so this is kind of like the way the Jets roster is right now. So at linebacker, the Jets are good for this year. They have two quality starters, Jamie Sherwood and Quincy Williams. Quincy Williams is in the final year of his contract. Not clear whether the Jets will bring him back. He's approaching 30. So for Francisco Mauigoa, it might be a year of developing, and then if he looks good on the practice field, the Jets may let Quincy Williams walk, let him step in. If not, then Williams might get re-signed. But for Barron, there's an opportunity to contribute right away, and this is true across the Jets roster. There are good starters in a lot of places, but there's not a lot of depth. And the defensive end spot, the Jets have two quality players. They have now, you may not want to hear the first guy I'm going to mention because he's a Florida State Seminole, but Jermaine Johnson, guy that was a first round pick 3 years ago. So
hey, I'm glad he's not at Florida State anymore. So I'm fine with that.
The other side is Will McDonald, who probably won't bother you. He went to Iowa State, so I don't think they played Miami recently.
Oh, they beat Miami in a bowl game.
Maybe. Oh, geez, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have mentioned that.
You're opening up all these wounds for me, John.
My bad. Will McDonald had double-digit sacks last year. So, again, he's out of Iowa State. He's with the Jets now. But after those two, there's not really anybody who stands out. So there's going to be an opportunity to play because, at the defensive end is one of those spots where guys need to come out. Guys need to get a rest. So, Tyler Barron, if he can play, will have every opportunity to earn a spot on the field, situationally this year. So it sounds like you think he could, if we see the good version of Tyler Barron, the guy who showed up in, the game, the games you mentioned, that this could be a guy who contributes to the Jets this year.
Yeah, totally. And nothing would surprise me with him because, again, like I'm not going to say he had this A+ banner year at Miami. Like there were certain games where he was an A+, other games where it was a C, C-, C+. But at the same time, it's a how much do I blame for all the other poor defenders that were the Achilles heel, and how much do I blame a defensive coordinator who seemed to lose the plot at Miami last year? So I think we will find out. This is what, and this has been a thing that's happened at Miami before. I mean, I remember, a couple decades ago, Miami had a journeyman wide receiver named Sam Shields. They could never figure out. He ends up getting drafted by Green Bay. They make him a cornerback and he becomes a perennial Pro Bowler. So, this has been one of those things. Sometimes guys at Miami don't seem to figure out exactly their role, or the coaches can't, and then they figure it out in the NFL. Barron could be one of those guys.
I feel like I'm hearing you talk about the Jets last year because there are so many Jets players who underperformed, and it's one of the things I keep saying is, like this guy underperformed, that guy underperformed, but this whole situation was so messy that I don't know if I can really blame him, and that's it because it just feels like it was a situation conducive for guys to kind of disappoint. So I guess maybe Mauigoa and Barron will be used to going into a situation like this.
Yeah, because like the way that I look at it is when you have, you have a chain and you have guys like Kiko and guys like Barron, I think were two of the strongest links in that chain. But when you have 4 or 5 bad links, the entire chain breaks. And that's kind of the way that I look at Miami's defense, because there were a couple of corners and a safety or two that just had ghastly seasons last year, John, and it affects the entire defense and Miami overall, their pass rush. And listen, Barron ended up leading the team in sacks when most people thought Ruben Bain would, because as a true freshman the year prior, he had a breakout 7.5 sack season. But, Bain missed a lot of games last year with injuries, so Miami's depth was tested at defensive end. And even when Bain came back, he was playing through injuries last year. So it's just, again, like it's hard for me to judge certain links of the chain when other links were breaking left and right.
All right. Well, Alex Donno, my colleague with Locked On Canes, thanks so much for joining us today. A lot of great information. We know our listeners can find you Locked On Canes because you're part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'll do the slogan: your team every day. New episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Any other place our listeners can find you?
Yeah, I also co-host Locked On ACC. So you can check me out there, and we'll be busy both on the Miami show and on the ACC show. We're going to be busy next week because I'll be at the ACC Media Days. They're having their kickoff conference next week, Tuesday through Thursday. So definitely check out the shows if you're interested. Locked On Canes and Locked On ACC.
Many thanks to Alex Donno for stopping by and providing such great insight on the players the Jets drafted from Miami in the spring. Now, during the Locked On Jets podcast, second round pick Mason Taylor has signed his rookie contract. That means the Jets have their entire 2025 draft class signed on time for training camp. For most teams, that's not a big deal. But for the Jets, it's cause for celebration. I'll explain why as we continue here on this Monday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Rugiet. Guys, you've probably heard of Viagra or Cialis. Maybe you've even tried them. But if you're looking for something beyond the usual pill, it's time to meet Rugiet Ready. Rugiet Ready is a next-gen prescription treatment designed to amplify arousal in the brain and boost blood flow. Unlike the usual pills that can take hours, Rugiet's 3-in-1 formula dissolves under your tongue and kicks in fast, on average in 15 minutes. Effects can last up to 36 hours, so you can stay confident and in control when the moment is right. If traditional options have not worked, Rugiet might be the answer. Over 150,000 men have already made the switch. Head to Rugiet.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LockedOnNFL to get 15% off today. That's RUGIET.com/LockedOnNFL and use promo code LockedOnNFL for 15% off. Individual results may vary with prescription treatment. Compounded drugs are permitted to be prescribed under federal law, but are not FDA approved and do not undergo FDA safety, effectiveness, or manufacturing review. Please visit the Rugiet website for full safety information. This is the Locked On Jets podcast here on this Monday. We've been talking about a couple of players the Jets drafted late in the 2025 NFL draft, Francisco Mauigoa and Tyler Barron out of Miami. Now let's talk about a player the Jets drafted early, second-round pick Mason Taylor, who was in the news late last week because he agreed to terms on his rookie contract. He was the last unsigned Jets draft pick from the 2025 class, so him agreeing to terms on his 4-year rookie deal means that the Jets will have their entire draft class signed on time for training camp. Taylor was the last Jets unsigned draft pick for a reason, and it really had nothing to do with the Jets. Heading into last week, 30 of the 32 picks in the second round remained unsigned. The only two players who signed were the top 2 picks of the round, and they both got fully guaranteed contracts. So if you were following developments last week, second round picks were pushing for fully guaranteed deals. In the past, teams have not fully guaranteed the contracts of second round picks. Then last week, as we started to near the deadline for training camp to begin, you started to see second round picks sign contracts. And most of them did not get fully guaranteed deals. In fact, Mason Taylor himself did not get a fully guaranteed contract, but he did get a contract where 91.4% of it is guaranteed, which is up from the past. In the recent past, players who were picked number 42 overall, which is where Mason Taylor was selected, have gotten between 77 and 78% of their contract guaranteed. Mason Taylor got 91.4% of his contract guaranteed. You know, in situations like this, I always ask myself, is this fight worth it for the team? And when it comes to guaranteeing contracts for second round picks, it's really not. I think when it comes to second round rookie contracts, teams should go as far as their way to accommodate players if guarantees are really important for players, because second round contracts on rookie deals, very favorable for teams. And so I applaud the Jets for getting this done, for kind of meeting Taylor halfway. The past couple of years, again, we've been talking about like 77 to 78% of the rookie contracts have been guaranteed for players drafted 42 overall. The Jets were willing to go up to 91.4 for Taylor. So, good job by the Jets. They now have their draft class fully signed on time for training camp. And normally that would not really be a big deal. But for me, it does mean something, because we are in the first year of the Aaron Glenn, Darren Muji regime. And you can't judge them on results yet. The Jets have not taken the field yet for a game under Aaron Glenn and Darren Muji. So for me, what you judge them on this first offseason is, are they getting the easy things right? Are they hitting the layups? And to this point, I think they have hit the layups. I think you saw an offseason where the Jets moved on from a failed era. They let Aaron Rodgers leave, which I think was absolutely the right move. Over the last week, they have struck long-term contract extensions with 2 key players, Garrett Wilson and Sauce Gardner, and they did it proactively. Garrett and Sauce were both 2 years away from free agency, but the longer you wait, the more complex these deals get. and it was not worth waiting. It was not worth risking these guys perhaps seeking bigger contracts a year from now. Jets got that done. And now the Jets have their entire draft class signed on time for training camp. And, I frequently refer to getting your draft pick signed on time for training camp as an intelligence test for front offices, because with the rookie wage scale, there's very, very little that's left for negotiation. And the team should never dig in its heels on any of the aspects that are up for negotiation. However, 2 of the last 3 Jets GMs have not had their full draft classes signed on time for training camp. John Idzik had a holdout his first year. D. Milner, who was drafted 9th overall in 2013. Joe Douglas, his first year, they had to hold out with Quinnen Williams. Now, that was an odd situation because Joe Douglas actually did not draft Quinnen Williams. The Jets made a GM change after the draft as Mike McCagnon was fired a few weeks after the Jets selected Williams, but Douglas did not have Quinnen Williams signed on time for training camp. And I think that with many of the issues in the past, the issues of the situations have happened so frequently that I blame ownership. I blame ownership for the Jets not being proactive, signing their own quality players. Ever since Woody Johnson bought the team, it's felt like negotiations with high-profile players have been dramatic, more dramatic than they needed to be. It started a few months into his regime, a few months after he bought the team, when Keyshawn Johnson was traded to Tampa Bay, and it's just continued over the last 25 years. And I think you could say the same thing with these holdouts. The Jets, in the rookie wage scale era, have had more holdouts than any other team. There was D. Milner. There was Sam Darnold in 2018. There was Quinnen Williams in 2019. There was Zach Wilson in 2021. And in every single one of these situations, the Jets dug in their heels over things that really weren't that important to them. Things that were clearly more important to the player than they were to the Jets. Things where the Jets would only receive a minimal gain. And it never really made sense why the Jets dug in their heels on these things. Now, I don't think the missed practice time from the holdouts really impacted these guys. I don't think D. Milner failed because he missed a couple practices in training camp. I don't think Sam Darnold failed because he missed a couple practices in rookie training camp. I don't think Zach Wilson failed because he missed a couple practices in training camp. But it was a case of Jets missing layups. And I think in many ways, this was symbolic of bigger issues within the organization, because if you can't get the easy things right, you're probably going to mess up the hard stuff. And that was true over and over for the New York Jets. So these 2 areas in particular, being proactive, extending your top end players, and getting your picks signed on time, they should not be big deals. But because of the way the New York Jets have operated over the last 25 years, they are big deals. And maybe this is a sign, at least temporarily, that we have people in charge who are running the team in a competent way. And maybe at least temporarily, and we can hope it's a sign that ownership is not getting involved, and ownership is not causing the problems it's caused in the recent past and even in the distant past. We'll find out more about Glenn and Muji once the season begins. 5 weeks into the season, we're not going to really remember the draft class getting signed on time because it's a really small deal. We'll remember Garrett and Sauce being extended, but we'll start to judge Glenn and Muji based on the results the Jets produce on the field. However, it's nice to see before the game starts that there are no unforced errors. Jets are doing everything they should be doing. Jets aren't making silly mistakes under this new regime, at least so far. And look, for a fan base that's starved for hope, for a fan base just looking for any reason to feel good about this team, I think through this offseason, you got to feel pretty good about the way Glenn and Muji have operated. It's, we haven't reached the real test yet, but there haven't been any unforced errors. And you haven't been able to say that about past Jets front offices. Anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on the podcast source, give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. Helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy your Monday, everybody, and we'll be back tomorrow to talk more Jets.